What is going on, guys? It's me here back with another First Descendant video. And for this video, I'm going to be going over the secret garden build that I've been working on. Now, before I get into this, I do want to preface by saying this gun is very strong. However, as far as kind of its main purpose, at least from my usage of it, is that the gun is really strong for mobbing. It can be okay for bossing, but just kind of how the passive actually works, the gun synergizes very well with certain descendants with mobbing because, you know, naturally when you're doing mobbing, you're going to be using your abilities and stuff, which benefits the weapon a lot, and we'll get into the unique passive in just a second here. But I did test it with bossing as well, and I kind of found it a bit underwhelming as opposed to something like the Enduring Legacy or the Greg's Reverse Fate. Again, it is pretty strong, but to actually benefit from the unique passive in bossing, you're going to have some downtime as well using your abilities. We don't really have a descendant that has like a spammable tech ability that's not going to actually end up reducing their overall damage output on a boss to where it would make sense to actually be spamming that and getting that damage bonus. You're actually just going to end up doing less because of the downtime of using your abilities. So I would definitely recommend this for mobbing as long as it makes sense to the descendant that you're using. Obviously, this gun is very popular with Freyna, so if you're looking to get a really strong weapon ready for the ultimate Freyna release, this is probably going to be the one that you want to have ready to go. Now, I did do a mobbing build, and I also did a bossing setup as well, kind of with the same polarity, so you won't have to recatalyze anything from the mobbing setup itself. I would definitely recommend using a different weapon for bossing unless this is your only option. Anyways, let's not waste any more time and get right into this build. So before I get into the attributes and the modules themselves, I want to quickly go over the unique ability. So it actually has two different unique abilities, and this is based on the type of ability that your descendant has. So if you cast a dimension type ability, you have a set chance to get a custom resource back. Now, custom resource is specific to certain descendants. So an example of this is like Bunny with her electricity or Glay with her blood bar. So pretty much those descendants that have that kind of extra resource bar outside of their mana bar. Now, again, this has to be a dimension skill for this to work. So this would only work on descendants with that extra bar that also have a dimension skill. Now, the other passive that comes with this is whenever you use a tech ability, you have a set chance to basically receive a stacking buff that stacks up 3 times. And it's going to give you at max stacks 16% firearm attack and 16% skill power each stack. So you can get up to 3 of those. And then you also get a flat 5% of each of those. So you're totaling 53% if you have all 3 stacks. Now you have to keep in mind that this is a 50% trigger rate. So ideally you want to use this on a descendant that has a very low cooldown tech ability. So again, an example of this would be like Freyna, because her 1 ability and her 3 ability, which are the 2 that you kind of throw out like toxic pools, you can get those on very low cooldown, and they're both tech abilities. So you can end up kind of consistently keeping those 3 stacks up. You're getting the extra skill power. So that's really good when you're doing mobbing stuff, and you're also getting that extra firearm attack. You can also use this on other descendants. An example of this would be like Viessa. If you're using cold-bloodedness on Viessa, you can get your blizzard to a 6-second cooldown. Now you are playing around with RNG a little bit here, but if you're literally just running around casting abilities, there's no reason not to just use this weapon anyways if you're not actively shooting your weapon. So if you're running around on Viessa, you know, putting blizzards down and casting abilities all over the place, there's no reason not to have this on anyways. Now there are other descendants with tech abilities and dimension abilities. I actually don't think the dimension passive on this is very good right now. I wouldn't really go out of my way to use this in most cases for the dimension passive. However, the pest control, again, it can be very good. It is situational. So on Freyna, it's going to be absolutely insane. So if you're getting ready for ultimate Freyna, this is probably your best in slot weapon. That could absolutely change depending on her new transcendent modules. There may be one that changes kind of her skill ability types, similarly to how Viessa has transcendent mods that make all her abilities singular. Now, I'm not going to go through all the descendants that this can benefit. Any descendant that you can get low tech cooldowns on, if you are playing that descendant and constantly using abilities for damage and they are on low cooldowns, then you can benefit from the secret garden. The last thing I want to say here is definitely max this weapon out if you plan to use it. If you don't have it maxed out, I don't know the exact percentages, but the trigger rates go down by quite a lot, as well as the duration on the pest control, and also the 16% for the firearm and skill power that also goes down. The trigger rate on the dimension side of it as well will go down, but again, I wouldn't really use it for that. If you have a descendant that has dimension tech, then hey, you get both, assuming you have, you know, a custom resource bar. But definitely try to max this one out. It's not as necessary as like a Greg's, but it's going to be highly beneficial and help you maintain those pest control stacks much better. I think the trigger rate without any copies is 30%. So, and then really quick going over the weapon stats themselves. This is a special rounds weapon. It is a burst fire weapon. So it's going to shoot 4 bullets at a time. If you don't know this already, you can come into your settings here, go to options, gameplay, gameplay, come down to change firing mode. If you turn this setting on, it's going to make it basically automatic fire for you. You can just hold down your fire button and it's just going to keep firing for you. So I would definitely recommend turning that on. And as for the weapon stats themselves, we have 48 rounds per magazine, which is very good. So that may be something we can take advantage of. 48 is a very good baseline. Reload time is currently 1.6 seconds. That's not a bad one whatsoever. Our base firearm critical hit rate is 50%, which is ridiculously high. This is as high as the afterglow sword. So you definitely want to take advantage of that really high base crit hit chance. And that is also because the crit hit damage multiplier is 2.25 times, which is the highest in the game to my knowledge. Definitely want to build all kinds of crit stuff on this weapon. It's extremely powerful. And then last kind of important thing to note is the weak point damage. Now, again, I said this isn't really a bossing weapon, but you know, you can benefit from weak point damage on mobs. However, with the mobbing setup, we're going to get as much raw damage from our crit stats rather than focusing too much on weak point, and also try to get a lot of uptime on the weapon itself. This is beneficial because not only are we able to just shoot the weapon more often, but we don't have as much downtime reloading and things like that, because again, this is a weapon that you're going to be using in between using abilities. So you don't want a lot of downtime on it because you don't want the weapon stopping you from kind of spamming your abilities and whatnot. The weapon is more there as a stat stick, but it also does a respectable amount of damage as well. All right, let's get into the weapon rolls here now. Now, this isn't exactly what I want. Ideally, what you're going to want to go for here, assuming you are using this for mobbing purposes, which again, I definitely recommend this for mobbing, you would want to get firearm attack, obviously, firearm crit hit rate, and that is because we have such a high base rate already. That 12% is about 5 point something extra percent on top of that for crit hit rate. Then obviously crit hit damage, again, we have a really high crit hit damage multiplier on the weapon, so we definitely want to roll that as high as we possibly can. Now, the last roll in this is kind of up to you. If you are planning to use this for bossing, what you want to roll as your fourth roll instead of fire attack is going to be Colossus damage. If you want to kind of flex this between mobbing and bossing, or if you are just good at hitting weak points on mobs and stuff like that, weak point damage is not a bad choice here because it has a 1.5 times multiplier, which is a respectable one. So a weak point roll is not bad whatsoever. And then if you are using this for mobbing purposes, there's actually quite a few viable rolls here. When it comes to mobbing, min-maxing is not nearly as important as when it comes to bossing. So just to give you some options here, one choice you could make is an element type. The actual attribute trigger rate on this weapon is very low, so you're probably not going to benefit too much from the element's passive, but you do get a little bit of extra damage on the base damage of the weapon itself. Some other very good rolls here is rounds per magazine. Again, we have a high base rounds per magazine of 48, so if you roll that, you can get about 5 to 6 extra shots, somewhere in that area. The recoil is actually not a terrible roll on this at all either. It does have quite a bit of kick on it, especially if you are on console. I've seen some more console gameplay and I'm starting to get a better idea of how bad it is to like try to control your weapon's recoil, especially with the aim assist and such. You kind of have to fight it a lot. Go with whatever you like if you are using this solely for mobbing, Colossus damage for bossing, and weak point damage if you are using it for both, or if you just want to click on heads of mobs. And now let's get into the mods themselves, and I'm going to provide some flex options after I go through the mods I have here, as well as kind of what you would want to do if you are planning to use this for Freyna, because I know a lot of you guys are getting this weapon ready for Ultimate Freyna, so I'll go over that as well. But first, I'm going to go over kind of the base setup I have here, and it's pretty straightforward. Again, the things I'm prioritizing here is going to be uptime as well as just ease of use and kind of benefiting as much as possible from our crit damage. Now, I'm not really investing into weak point damage on the mobbing build, and that is because you don't really need it for mobbing. Weak point is very good for bossing and helps you really min-max your damage during boss fights, but not really necessary in mobbing. Also, the gun has a 1.5 times base, and then there's also 50% hidden weak point damage on top of that. That applies to all weapons, by the way. So you actually have a 2 times multiplier on weak point at a base level on this gun. So I don't really see a reason to actually put weak point damage on the mobbing setup. And for our base damage mods, you guys already know this. I don't really need to walk you through this one anymore, but rifling reinforcement, action and chain reaction and fire rate up, you're going to want to take blue fire rate up here. Even though the crit multipliers are so high, this actually works out to be more damage overall, even in the case that this is a 4 burst weapon. Now after this, we're going full investment into crit as much as we can. So we're going to take better insight and better concentration, as well as concentration priority. Now this does hit our reload time a little bit, which, you know, I was preaching about the uptime on the weapon, so that does mess our uptime up a little bit, but we're going to compensate with a reload mod. And then insight focus, ideally you get that extra crit. That 14.5% translates to roughly 6% extra, and then you also get the 5% crit hit damage, which translates to like 12%ish. And with those crit mods on the weapon, we have a 82% crit rate basically at a baseline, no buffs or anything, and a 5.14 multiplier for firearm crit hit damage. So very consistent, very high crit damage on the weapon. And for our last kind of damage related mod, currently I have Sweeping Squad here. This is just going to buff the actual damage of firearm as you kill stuff. But again, I'm going to show you guys some flex options here in just a second, as well as kind of what you would want to do for Freyna. Now going back to the kind of having high uptime on the weapon itself, because again, we want to have high uptime so that we can constantly use our abilities without being disrupted too much. So we're going to be taking expand weapon charge. This just makes our magazine much larger, which just means less reloading. Now the nice thing about this mod is that at the very end of our magazine, we have 3 shots left still. So if you actually look at the count on our magazine, we have 71, and you really don't want the magazine to have like 1 bullet left over at the very end. You're going to have to wait for that 1 shot, which isn't going to really do a whole lot before you start reloading. So ideally you want to get like 3 to 4 shots at the very end of the magazine. We have 3 with this. And then to make up kind of for the loss in reload speed on concentration priority, I put in reload focus. You could also use a recycling genius if you want a little bit more, but it's not really going to make a huge difference here. And with this, you get some of that extra crit damage. Now I'm going to get into a couple different flex options here. Sweeping Squad is really good just for general usage. However, if you're using this on like say Freyna, a pretty good choice here would actually be a Venom Injector. Now this does have a pretty long cooldown on it, but if we're trying to just kind of spread poison and benefit as much as possible from Freyna's dots and such, this is a really good mod to take if you're using this for mobbing. One way you can do this is drop the polarity on this right here if you do want to keep the polarity on that, and then from here you could drop your insight focus 1 level if you don't want to recatalyze and you want to keep that slot there, and then you can grow Venom Injector in. There is also the mod Toxic Conductor, so if you're solely using this for Freyna, then what you could do is just catalyze this slot right here as a root tile, which is this symbol, and then you can also use Toxic Conductor if you'd like to. Now it doesn't have like an AoE explosion to it or anything like that, but it's just going to make you hit targets harder. But honestly, Sweeping Squad is very similar to that, and it also lets you use it on anybody, so I prefer that. Real quick, I'll just go over a boss build that you could use for this. It's not the best in the world, but again, I would not really recommend using this for bossing if you can't avoid it. But essentially, there's a couple of changes you would want to make if you are going to use this for bossing. One is going to be, we want to actually have weak point damage now, so we're going to add the weak point sight mod. Now you can add focus fire here if you want, or you can also add have aiming, but have aiming has that accuracy loss, which I've found actually really makes it a lot harder to hit weak points on kind of bosses that are moving, that don't just die in like 3 seconds. Focus fire gives you the extra crit damage, so the damage difference actually isn't as significant as you think, especially if you factor in missing weak points. So I prefer focus fire, especially on this gun, because it does have quite a bit of kick on it. But if you like have aiming and you are like in phase clan or something like that, then you can go ahead and use this. And then the last change we did is we did drop the reload focus to make up for the other weak point mod there. So we dropped that. We're keeping insight focus, but we did drop reload focus, and we did drop Sweeping Squad as well. I did try sharp precision shot on this particular weapon, but it doesn't work with burst fire weapons. It basically considers it as not continuous fire. So unfortunately you cannot use sharp precision shot, which would have been really nice because of how big the magazine size is on the weapon itself. But that's kind of why I don't really even bother with any of the yellow mods. The only one that's really worth using would be spray and pray, but I've opted to just go with kind of the more raw damage. And with spray and pray, you would have to also kind of move the polarity setup around here, so I've avoided using it. But if you do really want to use a special mod, I would definitely use spray and pray for this, especially because you are hitting crit so often. Essentially, when it comes off of cooldown, it's going to proc almost immediately. And that is going to do it for this one. Shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for the support. Also, shout out to my Twitch subscribers, and shout out to those of you supporting me through the Nexon Creator Program. I will leave links to all that stuff in the description below. And shout out to you, the viewer. Thank you so much for watching. This weapon is really awesome. I can't wait to use it on Freyna and also show it off when I actually do the Ultimate Freyna Guide. So looking forward to doing that in just about a month, actually. Anyways, that's it for this Yapathon, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.